Hi, everyone. I'm going to present this paper, which is joint work with Dimo Dimov, who isn't here today. He's in Bulgaria, 40 degrees warm, and he was complaining about that. Anyways, so this is very much work in progress. This is gathering some thoughts about how one can conceptualize opportunities as sort of as artifacts, as design artifacts. So this builds on work that I have done and Dimo has done on entrepreneurship as a form of artifact design, where the actual artifact being designed is the venture, the startup, the opportunity, which is another abstract way of describing that thing that is being designed. So this is kind of extending that. So very, very briefly, what I want to talk about is first how opportunities have kind of historically been conceptualized within this kind of dual nexus idea, where there are individuals and opportunities, and then say something about how opportunities can be conceptualized as artifacts through the work of Herbert Simon, which is what we've been used primarily up until today, and then try to say something more about it using the work of Karin Knorr-Settina, who is kind of a sociologist of science. The paper includes lots of stuff. I don't have time to talk about everything, and since Dimo is not here, I'm going to talk about the stuff that I think is most interesting. So you have to kind of bear with me here. So of course, historically, the whole idea of the dual nexus approach is that there are individuals and there are opportunities, and the opportunities are basically kind of environmental circumstances that objectively exist, and people kind of discover, or they have some sort of subjective belief that this exists as a profit opportunity. Creation people tend to have the same kind of definition of what an opportunity is. It's kind of a competitive market imperfection, but they focus less on discovering pre-existing such disequilibrium situations, but more on actually building up these kind of VRIN resources that Barney has been talking about for a long time to kind of create those imperfections endogenously. But in both cases, it is like existing market disequilibria that constitute opportunities. Of course, that's problematic because we can kind of only know that they existed as profit opportunities when someone has made a profit. So while you're building your company or whatnot, you don't know whether or not it's an opportunity with this definition. And I would say as well that the way that concept, the opportunity concept, was introduced to the entrepreneurship field from economic theory, primarily from the work of Israel Kirzner, is kind of this typical example of reification. You take a very abstract concept and you confuse it for something that exists in a behavioral or kind of empirical sense. And of course, Kirzner himself agreed with this, when they kind of called him to say that he won this entrepreneurship prize in Sweden. He's like, what are you doing? I have nothing to say about entrepreneurship as a behavioral discipline, or what constitutes, what drives successful entrepreneurship. So yeah. There are some problems with this way of conceptualizing opportunities, and one of the implications that Dimo has spent a lot of time teasing out is, of course, that it's this confusing kind of characteristic. This confusing, is it subjective, is it objective, means that it's really hard to develop useful theoretical and empirical kind of operationalizations of it that can be used for the type of research that we try to undertake. So what I've spent some time doing is try to think about, okay, how can we move from this kind of dual nexus of individuals and environmental circumstances to more of this design triad? And I made a nifty little illustration here, or so let's see if that works for you. So let's not just have like the individual and the environment, but let's have the artifact in the middle as well. And then instead of seeing the opportunity as residing in the environment, like these disequilibrium situations that kind of exist objectively out there, we kind of separate the environment from the opportunity and say that the artifact, the opportunity is the artifact. The opportunity is that thing that is being designed, this kind of profitable business, this venture. Of course, this draws a lot on Herbert Simon's work on design and the sciences of the artificial, where he explicitly talks about artifacts as interfaces between inner and outer environments. And the way I like to think about it is that you have like an inner environment of kind of organized individuals with some resources trying to build a new venture in the context in which they operate, which is like markets and institutions and regulations and all these things, competitors. artifacts in this sense is defined both in terms of purposiveness. An artifact is a man-made thing, so it's made for a purpose, and it's also defined in relation to its context. And of course, when Simon speaks about artifacts, he talks about both the purpose, the environment, but also the characteristics of the artifact, the character of the artifact itself. What is it like? And this is something that we haven't, I think if we want to make this whole idea of entrepreneurship as a form of business design, artifact design, we need to think about what is that artifact like? How can we think of it? What is a venture? How it is instantiated? How it's gradually developed using prototypes and intermediate kinds of artifacts, etc. So in a forthcoming book chapter with Vern Glaser, we try to kind of introduce the concept of entrepreneurial artifacts as any artifact that serves to instantiate kind of this abstract opportunity in a way that supports its future or further development. And that could be lots of things. It could be like these pen and paper user interface prototypes. It can be a business model canvas. It can be all these no-code tools that you can use to make quick software-based experiments. It can be software development kits that the people can manipulate locally and develop in their own different ways. It could be actual physical prototypes. It could be digital sketches. It could be business plans. It could be something that you draw on a whiteboard. All of these are ways of kind of instantiating this abstract kind of artifact that you're trying to design. And I've been toying around with some ways of taxonomizing it, listing different concepts from the opportunity field from more abstract to more concrete. And this whole abstract concrete dimension is very common in information systems and design theory and engineering, where people often operate with this kind of spectrum. In addition to just listing things, I've also spent some time thinking about various ways of categorizing entrepreneurial artifacts into different typologies. So in this AMR paper that was published last year, we talk about physical, digital, and narrative artifacts, where something like a metaphor that you voice, Gabby, would perhaps be an example of a narrative artifact. And this forthcoming paper with Vern Glaser, we instead talk about abstract, material, and narrative artifacts, where material includes both physical and digital. So, there are ways of trying to introduce useful ways of categorizing all these artifacts that entrepreneurs work with. But what we haven't talked a lot about is kind of how we can think about the ontological status of these artifacts, because they're not just subjective perceptions, right? They're not objective things existing out there, like a boundary object, like an object in the environment that you can just relate to somehow. They have a very peculiar kind of unfolding kind of status. They project towards something to be happening in the future. And I was going to say something about Heidegger here, because he talks about two modes in which things show up to people, both as very kind of practical things that he has this. He often uses the example of a pen. So when you're in the flow, you write with a pen. The pen kind of the pen kind of disappears. You don't even know that you have a pen. You just write and you do what is needed to get like text on the sheet. So it just completely, when you're in the flow, it kind of disappears. But then there's also this other kind of situation that appears when the flow breaks down, when you're not a good writer, when you're a beginner writer, or when kind of the pencil breaks, for instance. Then you enter into this kind of rational, scientific, detached mode. You think about, okay, how heavy is it? How did I drop it yesterday? So perhaps I cracked the little lead thing in the middle, all those things. So different ways in which things show up. One very absorbed, where things disappear. One kind of very detached, in the sense that things kind of come to the fore as isolated little elements that you can reflect on. Knorr-Cettina says that when we talk about epistemic activities, when we talk about creative work, these two modes in which we relate to things don't really make sense anymore. I mean, that's not how we relate to things. So she has examples of investment bankers using complex software to do their work. And she also was at CERN to look at these large colliders. And she's also investigated biologists who work with bacteria of various kinds. And she talks about, in that type of work, when people are absorbed, when people actually do their creative work, the things don't disappear, and they're not reduced to isolated elements. They actually, through that activity, become clarified and expanded and enlarged in various ways, and they're visualized and they're instantiated and kind of twisted around and explored in a way that is not making the thing disappear and not reducing them to some sort of basic lower level elements. So, you know, people use this type of thing to kind of investigate things. And she says, which I think is kind of nice, that observation and inquiry reveal them by increasing rather than reducing their complexity. And of course, in the Heidegger example, you know, when the pen breaks down, complexity is kind of gone away. You focus on some isolated properties to kind of figure out, okay, what's going on here. So it's neither invisible nor simplified, but it's kind of something else. And she talks about these epistemic things, and I think opportunities and these things that entrepreneurs kind of try to design fall within this category, of course. They have an unfolding ontology, is a concept she uses, right? So, which relates to the practice of doing things. And this unfolding ontology is the things, the epistemic objects that you work with are actually characterized by their incompleteness of being. You can think about a prototype or an MVP or something. It's not what it is in itself that is its kind of ontological essence. It's the fact that it's incomplete and projects and leads the way forward that is its fundamental characteristics. So they're to a great extent defined not just about from what they are, kind of a sketch on a whiteboard or a drawing on a paper, but they're defined what they are not. They're defined by what they kind of point toward in a certain sense. Let me see if this makes sense. Yeah. So she talks about epistemic things as having three basic characteristics. They're unfolding, they're dispersed, and they're question generating. And I think this fits so neatly into what entrepreneurs work with, right? So they're unfolding. You can like this, these are quotes from the paper. So you can take an MVP or a prototype or something like that. Its basic function is to elicit feedback or engagement by other people, which allows you to gradually refine it, right? You put a prototype into the hands of someone, not to just have it, but to have them kind of engage in a process where you jointly kind of develop it further and allow it to kind of unfold and fulfill its kind of promise, so to speak. They're dispersed. She talks about epistemic things as not having a kind of real reality beyond all these instantiations, but all these various instantiations, that is the thing in itself. There is nothing beyond it. Now you can say that, well, there is like the opportunity that you pursue, like there's the business, but what is a business? You know, it is all these different things. It is like the people you organize, the prototypes and the products you build, the organization you have, the visions you articulate, etc. So it has this kind of ontological characteristic of being dispersed at its core as well. And finally, they're question generating. You know, they fulfill. They kind of speak back to you and allow for a constructive dialogue with others. So the very incompleteness of being suggests ways to develop them further. So again, you can think of a prototype that you show to a potential customer. That prototype, by not being perfect, begs the question of how it should be developed further. So the artifacts, the epistemic things kind of ask you to kind of develop them further. So again, this is very much just ideas and work in progress. But I think if we want to take this idea of entrepreneurship as a form of design, business design, startup design, venture design seriously, and think about what is the status of the things we work with in the process of designing, I think her work can be very useful. So thank you.
I haven't broken it yet. Great job. Could you go back to that last slide?
Sure.
I look. I mean, in terms of the maybe the one that said question generating.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That's really. I mean, I feel like I'm not familiar with this author, so I'm very excited. You mentioned CERN. I was excited because CERN just had a big announcement yesterday about finding a tetraquark, which of course baffled all my friends when I excitedly told them. But I sort of like this what you've got on the slide, because so often, you know, the human tendency is to not. I don't want to generate more questions. I want the answers. and
Mm-hmm.
reality, anyone who's pivoted an MVP multiple times themselves will know that that's an issue. So, so how do you? I'm going to be obnoxious and steal the first question, but what do like MBA students or business students think about this stuff?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't introduce it, through Heidegger or some abstract, sociologist of science. But I can tell you, when I teach and I talk about, prototypes as having these functions, and that's the role they play, it clearly resonates. And I mean, if you talk to, I've worked a lot with. Actually, it's nice to hear, Gabi, about your examples, because I worked a lot with computer architecture people and high performance computing people, and I've done kind of workshops for startups in that context. And of course, this is how they think about what they're doing. I mean, they build something in order to kind of test and generate new insights and move things forward. So, I mean, I think this is a very intuitive way of thinking about the things that you work with, the artifacts that you work with, if you are engaging in what Karin Knorr-Cetina then calls epistemic work, like knowledge-oriented work. That is the nature of the thing you work with. So I probably wouldn't use all these strange words and concepts, but the basic idea, I think, is very, very intuitive to anyone doing creative work.
All right, Christoph.
And to your question,
yeah, Christoph has a question.
Yeah.
And just quick question regarding the opportunity. First, a comment. Henrik, I really love how you transfer in analogy these concepts to the entrepreneurship field. It's really, really interesting stuff. Really cool. And I had a question, and I already had this question when I was reading the Aim Up paper on opportunities, and how you conceptualize it as an artifact. I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask you about that, and what do you think about that? So could you go back to the kind of the list of more abstract and less abstract kind of opportunity artifact?
Yeah, these ones.
Yeah, because I thought this was really cool and really nicely linking the artifact and opportunity thing. And then I asked myself, because when I'm thinking about artifacts, I'm always thinking about design knowledge, and then I'm of course very much influenced by Jan von Brocke's work and then this problem solution space constituting design knowledge. And then I asked myself, for example, landing pages. I asked myself, okay, I could see that as part, kind of as a model or an instantiation or something from the solution space. And then I thought, is this already capturing part of the problem? Is the artifact in Simon's way kind of also having part of the problem space in there? Or is there just a solution space part there?
Yeah,
the opportunity there, or is this
perhaps I think differently about these things compared to John. I don't think I do though, but I would say that any solution, a solution is defined in terms of the problem it solves, right? You can't just have a generic solution, then it's not a solution. So if you have a solution, that implies that there is a problem. So if you propose if you have a landing page where you, for instance, pitch a value proposition, that value proposition is intended to kind of alleviate someone's pain or satisfy a need or something like that. So it implies a problem, I think. A solution always implies a problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Really? Yeah, cool. Many thanks.
Yeah. And I was going to say another thing before Christoph asked this question about kind of this work being unfamiliar. I mean, I'm sure it is in the entrepreneurship field. I've never seen anyone reference Karin Knorr-Cetina, but she's actually quite popular amongst some organization theory people who are interested in practices, like practice theory people. So she's kind of big with those people. They like her. So those people who cite Shatsky and Bourdieu, they will have heard of Karin Knorr-Cetina as well. So it's not that it's completely foreign terrain to management in general.
Oh, they hate it. Okay, anyways.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking back to there's the Russ McBride and his crew talking about the social ontology of entrepreneurial phenomena. And
Exactly.
I like going just to go watching the looks on the faces in the audience. There are some true believers, and a lot of people who are just sort of staring like, what did I just hear? I think it's great stuff. But
well, I like that social ontology. I mean, this is social ontology in a certain sense.
But a lot of our colleagues don't want to. They didn't become an entrepreneurship professor to do difficult science.
Right. But I think the problem is, and this is something that Simon, of course, has spoken extensively about as well, about how you organize a business school or professional education institution or an R&D department for that matter. So we talked about that.
Really, can you expand on that? That's a really really important point.
Yeah, because he talked about in all those institutions that are not properly kind of disciplinary, like an engineering faculty, there are the parent disciplines, like it might be material science or theoretical physics, but then you have the engineers who actually build stuff and develop design knowledge, which might be tools and useful constructs for designing bridges or whatnot. And then on the other hand, so you have the designers in the middle, the engineers in the middle, the engineering professors, then you have the parent disciplines, the natural sciences, and then you have the people with the problems, the professionals who actually do design bridges and build stuff. And as an academic profession or as an academic community in between the disciplinary traditions and the practice people tend to gravitate to one or the other, right? So either you're like a second-rate natural scientist, or you're just, I think he uses the term, a second-rate purveyor of almost up-to-date management concepts when he talks about the business school, right? So in the business school, some people are wannabe philosophers or wannabe social theorists or whatnot, or they are second-hand, consultants, writing down what is happening on the ground with the profession that you're supposed to serve. And Simon says that these people are like oil and water, collectively they tend to kind of don't respect one another, they don't like one another. And for a business school or any professional education institution or R&D department to actually function properly, you need to constantly mix around the oil and the water, otherwise they will separate. And I think that's a really useful insight. And I emailed that paper when he talks about this to every dean we ever had at my university to make sure that they're aware of this tendency.
As long as there isn't like a drone with a missile outside your window that the dean sent.
I'm in the basement here, so no windows.
You're safe. Great. Well, this is really good. I think we're pretty much on schedule. But I'm really jazzed by this. I did put a note in the chat. Be sure and share your email addresses, because Conrad's going to want to talk to all three of you later.
I have a question. One quick last question. Henrik, so we are now in the final revisions or final last edits of a paper about the business model as an artifact and about the different functions it can fulfill. And we have identified 4 or 5 functions, communication and persuasion, whatever, understanding, managing. And so, as my co-author said, we have to put Berglund in there because the paper has been under review for 2 years and now you're there and we have to mention you. So the business model artifact, as we look at it, would it be a conceptual or a narrative artifact?
Again, these are fairly arbitrary kind of categories, but in that latest paper or book chapter with Vern Glaser, we talk about abstract, material, and narrative, and there we actually use business models as an example of an abstract artifact.
Okay, good to know, because that's what my co-author said. I said no, but now that I hear you, I'm like, okay, fine.
But I mean, of course, and then we make a point in that book chapter as well of saying that any particular kind of thing out there in the world can be part of, it can be both an abstract artifact and a material one, right?
And
so if I draw the business model on a whiteboard, it's like instantiated in a kind of physical material, right?
I understand.
But it's also an abstract thing. And then I talk about it and I frame it.
And it becomes narrative.
Ways. Yeah. So, exactly. I mean, these are just useful concepts to make sense of the things that we work with, but it's not that they have a unique and one-to-one correspondence with particular things. I think it's concepts that you can use to more constructively think about the things that entrepreneurs work with to develop their ventures.
Yeah. Thank you so much.